If someone had told me 3 years ago that hoarding toilet paper and spam was more important than saving the world, I would have thought they were insane. But now, if anyone dares touch the crate of expired braised beef noodles in my basement, I won't hesitate to shove my self-defense shotgun right into their mouth. This is Neo-Tokyo, a wasteland smashed to pieces by the gods. After the day of Godfall, those otherworldly deities that plummeted from the torn sky turned the once bustling Akihabara into a ruin saturated with magical radiation. Here, gold is too stiff even to wipe your ass with. The highest forms of hard currency are pure water, anti-radiation meds, and high-calorie instant foods. My name is Rei Kamaya, a lone wolf scavenger barely scraping by in this mad world. At this moment, I am prone within the ruins of a collapsed family mart on the edge of Akihabara, struggling to pry open a massive slab of load-bearing wall with a crowbar. My magic Geiger counter is clicking frantically, but the eerie golden glow emanating from beneath makes it impossible for me to stop. With a sharp clack, the rubble was finally overturned, exposing a charred meteoric crater within the halo of my flashlight. At the bottom of the pit, there were no canned goods as I had hoped. Instead, there lay a woman. She had exquisite silver hair that seemed to reflect the moonlight itself, and she wore tattered white orm armor. Most striking of all were the 6 broken wings of light protruding from her back, and a flickering golden halo suspended above her head. A fallen angel, or rather, a high and mighty deity. Just my luck, it's a piece of living scrap. I spat under my breath. On the wasteland, everyone knows a common truth. Fallen gods not only lose their world-shattering divine powers, but because the mortal realm lacks power of faith for them to absorb, they will starve to death if they don't consume massive amounts of calories just like humans. However, that halo is a good piece of gear. If I knock it off and take it to the black market in Shinjuku, it could be traded for at least 100 pounds of radiation-free northeast rice. Without a moment's hesitation, I drew the tactical knife from my belt, slid down the rubble into the bottom of the crater, and reached out to grab the halo above her head. The very instant my fingers were about to touch the halo, those tightly closed eyes snapped open. They were pupils of pure gold, filled with a suffocating majesty and arrogance. Presumptuous! Accompanied by a crisp yet oppressive rebuke, a faint but incredibly domineering repulsive force flicked my hand away. The silver-haired goddess staggered to her feet from the bottom of the crater. Even though she was covered in dust and one of her wings was snapped in half, she still tilted her snow-white chin high, staring fixedly at me with a gaze that looked down upon a lowly ant. Lowly mortal, how dare you attempt to desecrate the great Seraphim goddess of light, Seraphina, with those filth-stained hands? She let out a cold snort, and raised her hand haughtily. Kneel at once! Surrender the sovereignty of this city and prepare the most lavish sacrifices for me. As a reward, this goddess shall bestow upon you the supreme glory of becoming my head priest. I stared at her expressionlessly, as if looking at a complete moron missing a brain stem. I didn't kneel, nor did I entertain her words. I simply took 2 steps back in silence, sat down on a flat slab of concrete, and pulled a slightly shriveled cup of braised beef noodles out of my prized tactical backpack. Next, I unscrewed the thermos I carried with me and slowly poured the precious filtered boiling water inside into the cup noodles. What are you doing? Mortal, are you ignoring the oracle? Seraphina furrowed her beautiful brows, a hint of anger creeping into her voice. I tore open the seasoning packet, stirred the contents of the paper cup twice with a fork, and pressed the lid back down. Shut up and wait 3 minutes, I said coldly. A strange silence fell over the ruins. 1 minute passed, then 2. In this wasteland lacking spices and fats, the combination of industrially synthesized beef flavoring, rich soy sauce, and dehydrated vegetables mixed with boiling water unleashed a terrifying aroma comparable to a biochemical weapon. Carried by the night breeze, this scent drifted precisely into Seraphina's nostrils. I clearly saw the goddess, who just moments ago was clamoring to rule the city, twitch her nose violently as her golden pupils began to focus uncontrollably and frantically on the paper cup in my hand. Gurgle, gurgle, gurgle. A loud, rumbling growl, like a sudden clap of summer thunder, erupted from the goddess's flat belly. In the silence of the ruins, it sounded particularly deafening. Seraphina's face instantly flushed a deep crimson. She clutched her stomach tightly, her noble composure teetering on the brink of collapse. 3 minutes were up. I lifted the lid, picked up a mouthful of curly noodles soaked in broth with my chopsticks, and slurped them into my mouth right in front of her. As the piping hot soup exploded in my mouth, I made an intensely satisfied chewing sound. Gulp! Seraphina swallowed hard, the sound echoing loudly. Her broken wings of light even trembled slightly from her intense craving for the food. She bit her lip, attempting to maintain a final shred of dignity. That That tribute radiating a strange magical power, offer it to me. I shall grant you absolution for your insolence. I took a sip of the noodle broth, lifted my eyelids, and pointed toward the entrance of the convenience store ruins. There, 3 mutated zombies, having caught the scent of the broth, were wandering over while letting out ear-piercing screeches. Want to eat? I let out a cold laugh. Go clear out those mutated zombies outside. 1 zombie for 1 mouthful of soup. Kill all 3, and the noodles and the broth are all yours. Seraphina's eyes widened as if she had heard some unthinkable blasphemy. But when she looked again at the steaming bowl of instant noodles in my hand, her reason was completely shattered by hunger. You damn peasant, remember this! The haughty goddess of light let out a breakdown-induced scream. She didn't even tap into her remaining holy magic. Instead, she snatched a rusted rebar from the ground and, like a lioness protecting her kill, charged roaring at the 3 pathetic mutated zombies. Watching the goddess smash the zombies into pulp with a steel bar amidst the ruins, I stuffed a piece of dehydrated beef into my mouth. On this wasteland, there is no deity that cannot be tamed by carbohydrates. If there is, just add a braised egg. After that night, my underground shelter gained a very troublesome tenant. My base of operations was established in an abandoned equipment maintenance station of the old Tokyo subway, a full 30 meters below the surface. I had reinforced this place with thick lead plates and armored steel, turning it into an absolute fortress. Pushing open the heavy airtight door, what greeted the eye was not dilapidated ruins, but rows of steel shelves packed with various military rations, compressed biscuits, and canned goods. When Seraphina first stepped inside, she initially covered her nose in extreme disgust, remarking in a tone one might use to inspect a cesspool that this place was a rusty underground rat hole. However, just 5 seconds later, her pure gold pupils were practically welded to the shelves, and saliva began to flow uncontrollably down her snow-white chin. The first morning of our cohabitation in the wasteland was awakened by an incredibly arrogant oracle. Mortal, wake up! Rubbing my bleary eyes, I saw Seraphina standing before my cot. Her tattered set of holy gold armor had been stripped off and tossed into a corner by me. She was now wearing one of my oversized, yellowing old t-shirts. The once sacred goddess of light now looked like a runaway teenage gamer girl. In my dreams last night, this goddess caught a glimpse of a premium holy water sacrificed to the gods by humans of the old era, she declared, hands on her hips, her 6 tattered wings of light fluttering arrogantly behind her. It is a deep, dark black, and upon drinking, countless bubbles dance upon the tip of the tongue. Mortal, go at once and fetch me the tribute known as cola. Expressionless, I pulled a loaded Glock from under my pillow, rested it on my chest, and rolled over. Turn left and walk to the end. There's a rusty iron bucket. Go take a piss and look at your reflection. In this place, calories are the only true god. There is only one rule: if you don't work, you don't eat. How dare you defy the will of a god? Breakfast is a slice of fried spam and half a compressed biscuit. I interrupted her, without even turning my head. Where do I start working? The dignity of a deity collapsed instantly in the face of processed meat. Soon, I discovered the immense commercial value hidden within this useless goddess. On the wasteland, the greatest challenge to survival isn't the monsters, but the water sources heavily contaminated by magical radiation. In the past, I had to pay a staggering price every month at the black market to exchange for expensive chemical filter cartridges. But now, I have a top-tier humanoid water purifier. I carried a bucket of irradiated sewage, retrieved from the surface ruins and emitting an eerie green fluorescence, and placed it in front of Seraphina. Clean it, I commanded. You're actually using noble light magic to purify this sewer filth? Seraphina protested through gritted teeth, her face flushed with humiliation. I didn't say a word, but silently pulled a tin of luncheon meat from my tactical vest. The pull tab gave a crisp click, and the rich aroma of cured meat wafted out. Seraphina's throat bobbed violently. She immediately closed her eyes and hovered her hands over the bucket. A flash of holy white light surged, and the bucket of originally murky green toxic water instantly became crystal clear, even emitting a hint of sweetness like glacial meltwater. I picked up the ladle and took a sip. The taste was even better than old-world Evian mineral water. This was absolute pure water that could fetch an astronomical price on the black market. Good, you've earned your breakfast. I sliced off a thin piece of luncheon meat and tossed it into her aluminum lunchbox. This is only the beginning. By afternoon, the fuel for the shelter's wood stove was running low. I took her to a desolate grove of dead trees on the surface. To save our precious chainsaw fuel, I pointed at a thick, mutated dead tree and told her, "Chop this tree into 30-centimeter logs." I am the goddess who presides over light and retribution. Not your personal lumberjack. Seraphina finally snapped, pointing a finger at my nose and shouting. I sighed, pulled half a bar of expired chocolate sealed in a plastic bag from my pocket, and waved it in the sunlight. Seraphina's voice came to a sudden halt. She took a deep breath and raised her right hand high, as a blazing holy sword, condensed from pure light elements, took shape in the void. Ha! With a flash of sword light, the mutated withered tree, as hard as iron, was sliced into perfectly uniform logs of exact length within seconds. Afterward, she even thoughtfully released a wisp of divine fire, instantly drying out any excess moisture in the wood. That night, the wood stove in the basement burned exceptionally bright. I sat by the fire, flipping through the supply ledger, my heart brimming with joy. In just a single day, this worker deity had saved me the massive expense of purchasing 5 high-grade water filter cores and 3 liters of gasoline. On the other side of the fire, the noble goddess of light sat on an ammo crate, holding a chipped aluminum basin with her face covered in coal dust. As she wolfed down sizzling, greasy slices of grilled spam, she issued orders to me through a mouthful of food. Mortal, your tribute is barely acceptable. This goddess permits you to continue cooking for me tomorrow. Also, could you add a fried egg tomorrow? Watching her heartless, gluttonous display, a cold smirk tugged at the corner of my mouth. Excellent. As long as she still has an appetite, this powerful deity will have no choice but to obediently remain Rei Kamaya's exclusive high-level laborer. At 2 a.m, the abandoned subway station beneath Neo-Tokyo was deathly silent, save for the dull, low growl of the aging diesel generator. I sat at a desk welded from rusted iron plates, conducting my weekly inventory by the dim light of a kerosene lamp. After confirming the reserves of canned food and purified water, I very carefully pulled a small, lead-wrapped iron box from a hidden compartment at the very bottom of the desk. That was my top-secret private vault. Opening the box, I found a bar of Meiji milk chocolate, already frosted with white bloom and exactly 1 year past its expiration date. On a wasteland riddled with radiation, such a combination of pure cocoa butter and industrial sugar was worth more than a fully kitted assault rifle. It was the ultimate luxury, capable of providing a supreme hit of dopamine in the midst of despair. I swallowed hard and peeled back the silver foil with agonizing slowness. The faint aroma of chocolate instantly diffused through the cold, damp air. Just as I was about to place this peerless delicacy into my mouth, a faint golden light suddenly flickered to life on the ventilation duct above my head. I smell it. The scent of the dark Eucharist. A ghostly whisper abruptly shattered the silence of the sanctuary. I snapped my head up, only to see Seraphina, who was supposed to be sleeping on the cot, clinging to the ventilation duct like a giant gecko. Her pure gold pupils glowed like searchlights in the darkness, locked firmly onto the chocolate in my hand. A glistening silver thread of drool was slowly sliding down the corner of her mouth. Get back to your bed, you gluttonous white pigeon! I snapped coldly, immediately clenching the chocolate in my palm. Audacious mortal! Seraphina leaped down from the 3-meter-high duct, her tattered wings of light fluttering twice in the air before she landed steadily. She messily wiped the drool from her mouth and forced herself into a pose of divine majesty. This goddess's core urgently requires sugar supplements to repair her divinity. Hand over that dark sacrament radiating the scent of corruption at once. This is a divine oracle. Divine oracle my ass, this is my midnight snack, I retorted without yielding an inch, bringing the chocolate directly to my lips. You're not allowed to eat that. The noble seraph completely tore off her disguise, letting out a blood-curdling scream as she lunged at me like a crazed wild boar. This wasn't some magical duel between deities. This was a bottomless, wasteland street brawl ignited over a piece of junk food. She slammed headfirst into my chest, the massive impact sending me and my office chair flipping backward. We rolled frantically across the cold concrete floor. I thought a god who had lost their magic would be a pushover, but I was wrong. The muscle density and physical resilience of that divine body were absolutely ridiculous. Let go! You blasphemous heretic! Seraphina clung desperately to my right hand, which was gripping the chocolate, and opened her mouth to bite down on my wrist. Let go! Are you a dog? I roared. Utilizing military close-quarters combat techniques, I snapped my left arm around her neck, attempting to subdue her with a chokehold. But she didn't follow the rules at all. Her tattered left wing suddenly swung out with a sharp crack, slamming into my face like a glowing door panel and leaving me seeing stars. In the midst of the violent struggle, my grip slipped, and the chocolate flew into the air in a perfect parabolic arc. Time seemed to freeze at this very moment. Both of our gazes were locked dead onto that piece of chocolate. Without a hint of hesitation, Serafina and I both lunged from the ground simultaneously, like hungry tigers pouncing on their prey. In the end, my combat experience proved superior, and I snatched the chocolate back into my hand midair. But at the same time, Serafina collided with me, slamming me hard into a pile of empty water buckets. Clatter. Using the momentum of my fall, I rolled over and pinned her beneath me, locking her waist tightly with my legs and wrenching her arm behind her back with my left hand, pinning her to the ground in a spread eagle position. It was a textbook tactical restraint. Let me go. I'll kill you. I'll bring down divine punishment. Serafina thrashed wildly on the ground like a fish out of water, screaming curses. Quiet. I pressed my knee into her back, then raised the chocolate bar with my right hand directly above her line of sight, slowly and triumphantly biting off a large chunk. The crisp sound of crunching echoed through the silent shelter. I smacked my lips loudly on purpose, letting the sweet, rich aroma of cocoa butter waft toward her. Serafina stopped struggling. She stared at the chewed-up chocolate in my mouth, her eyes instantly welling with red. A single tear of humiliation and despair rolled down her dust-covered cheek, and she let out a mournful cry like a mother wolf who had lost her cub. My Holy Communion! I released my grip on her. She sat dejectedly on the ground, hugging her knees like a child who had suffered a great injustice, even the wings of light on her back dimming. Looking at her in such a pathetic state, I sighed. On this cruel wasteland, I had been cold-blooded for far too long in order to survive, but tonight's absurd struggle had allowed my tightly wound nerves to relax for the first time in ages. I tossed the remaining small piece of chocolate into her lap. Tomorrow's lunch and meat quota is cut in half, I said coldly, turning away to head toward my cot. Serafina froze for a moment, then immediately clutched the half-piece of chocolate tightly like a stray dog guarding its food. As she shoved the chocolate fiercely into her mouth, she muttered indistinctly at my retreating back. Peasant! Sooner or later this goddess is going to hang you on a cross. And roast you like a squid. Listening to the sound of chewing behind me, I pulled up the blanket in the darkness, unable to stop the corners of my mouth from turning up slightly. Life in this wasteland didn't seem quite so unbearable anymore. The piercing wail of a red alert shattered the silence of the underground shelter. I bolted upright from my desk, grabbing the tablet. On the monitor connected to the surface cameras, over 30 figures on heavy modified motorcycles and rusted pickups were rowdily surrounding the blast door of my hideout at the subway entrance. Leading them was a bald, burly man whose left arm had been crudely replaced with a hydraulic mechanical limb, encrusted with revolting sarcomas. It's Iron Tumor Shibata and his scavenger thugs. I gritted my teeth, quickly swung open the weapons locker, grabbed a Remington shotgun, and began pressing slugs into the magazine one by one. This group was the most notorious pack of locusts in the ruins of Akihabara. They had clearly tracked the trail I left while out fetching water a few days ago, and discovered this underground bunker, teeming with supplies. What's all that noise outside so early in the morning? Serafina sat up from the cot in the corner, rubbing her eyes while still clutching a half-eaten piece of compressed biscuit. Thugs! They're here for the supplies. I pulled on my ballistic tactical vest, clipped 2 high-explosive grenades to my chest, and issued orders without looking back. Hide behind the water purification tank on the bottom level. If I fail to hold the entrance, crawl out through the backup ventilation duct. Remember, you must not let them get their hands on the luncheon meat in the warehouse. At the mention of supplies and luncheon meat, Serafina's hand stopped mid-rub. Boom! The surveillance footage shook violently as Shibata's men used a rocket launcher to blast open the first camouflage door on the surface. The ear-piercing screech of tearing metal echoed down the passage into the underground. Move in, boys! That lone wolf Kamaya is a hoarder. The clean water and canned food in there will last us half a year. Shibata's coarse, manic laughter reverberated through the tunnel. I raised my shotgun, kneeling behind the first line of defensive sandbags, my eyes locked onto the corner of the passageway. 30 against 1. Even with the geographical advantage, this was a desperate battle with slim chances of survival. I was already prepared to detonate the explosives pre-planted in the tunnel, and take them all down with me. Just then, an unnaturally scalding hand rested on my shoulder. I turned my head in shock, only to find that Serafina had somehow already stepped in front of me. She was no longer wearing that ridiculous, oversized t-shirt. Instead, she had donned that suit of shattered sacred gold armor once again. Her solid gold pupils, which usually stared blankly at food, were now burning with a blinding radiance that was impossible to look at directly. Did you just say that those filthy vermin have come to seize the tributes that belong to me? Her voice was no longer that of a spoiled, bossy wasteland girl, but had taken on an ethereal, soul-shaking resonance, as if hundreds of people were speaking in unison. Stop being crazy, get back! They have heavy firepower! I shouted, desperately trying to pull her back. But Seraphina broke free from my grasp with a gentle tug. She looked up, staring toward the sound of the chaotic, approaching footsteps deep within the passage. In the next second, a miracle occurred. The 6 tattered wings of light behind her erupted in an instant with an incredibly dazzling, incandescent glow. The searing holy light, like materialized flames, soared from her wings, instantly illuminating the entire dark underground passage. The temperature in the air rose sharply, yet these flames did not ignite the surrounding debris. Instead, they instantly purified the eerie green particles of magical radiation in the air into nothingness. Shibata and his thugs, who had just rounded the corner, were met head-on by this scene that looked like a deity descending to earth. The raucous laughter of the entire group died instantly in their throats. A pack of mortals, reeking of sin and stench. Seraphina slowly levitated into mid-air, looking down upon the mob like an inviolable true goddess. She slowly raised her right hand, pointing a slender finger forward. How dare you lay hands on this goddess's exclusive granary? Prepare to face the baptism of the holy flame of light. Boom! A wall of pure white fire swept through the corridor like a tsunami. It was no mortal flame, but the power of pure law. The white holy fire instantly engulfed the thugs' formation. There were no screams of burning flesh, only the terrifying sound of melting metal. The moment the automatic rifle in Shibata's hand touched the holy fire, it turned directly into molten iron. The thugs' body armor and mechanical prosthetics dissolved as rapidly as snow under a scorching sun. Most terrifying of all, several thugs who had mutated due to severe radiation had their mutated tissues forcibly purified under the radiance of the holy fire. The pain caused them to roll frantically on the ground, letting out shrill, agonizing wails. Absolute dominance. No physical weapon could stand against such pure, divine power. Monster! She's a monster! Run! Get out of here, now! The thugs, who had been ferocious just a moment ago, were now scrambling and crawling in a frantic escape toward the surface. Even their leader, Shibata, abandoned a melted mechanical arm, fleeing into the thick fog of the wasteland like a beaten dog. Dead silence returned to the corridor once more, with only a few puddles of molten iron on the ground still emitting a faint red glow. I stood there frozen, shotgun in hand and mouth agape, feeling as though my earlier preparations had been a complete joke. For the first time, I felt a visceral realization of exactly what kind of terrifying, cosmic-level entity I had been feeding with luncheon meat every day. As the fiery light slowly dissipated, Seraphina descended from midair back to the ground. The divine aura surrounding her vanished without a trace the moment she landed. She turned around, plopped down onto my sandbag defense line, wiped the sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand, and began to pant heavily. Kamaya. She looked at me, her eyes once again sparkling with that familiar, expectant light. I just exhausted a massive amount of divine power to protect the kitchen. As a reward for tonight's late-night snack, could you open a can of braised pork for me? I looked at her face, covered in dust yet still breathtakingly beautiful, and silently lowered the shotgun. Well, it seemed the dignity of a goddess was, in the end, no match for a can of braised pork. Ever since Shibata and his gang of thugs were turned into a wasteland joke by the holy fire, the underground life I shared with Seraphina had entered an unprecedented golden age of development. With her acting as a tireless, human-shaped high-grade water purifier, I began disguising large quantities of pure water as deep-mined mineral water from the old world, bringing it to the Rust Market in the Weno ruins for black market trading. Water of such high purity, completely free of magical radiation, was more sought after on this wasteland than the liquid gold of the old era. With just 10 liters of water, I managed to trade with Old Ma, the black market merchant, for 2 full crates of dehydrated vegetables, 5 pounds of extremely precious natural white sugar, and even 50 rounds of military-grade armor-piercing bullets. Brother Kamaya, you must have found a sealed underground water vein from the old era, haven't you? Old Ma whispered a warning to me while his trembling hands tested the water quality. But you'd better be careful. This water is so pure it's almost eerie. Drinking it can even slightly heal radiation sickness. If those lunatics in the Shinjuku district find out about this, you'll be in deep trouble. At the time, my mind was filled with nothing but the braised pork Seraphina had been clamoring for, and I didn't take Old Ma's warning to heart. It wasn't until that evening, as I was heading back to the shelter through the ruins on the edge of Chiyoda Ward with a pack full of supplies, that something strange happened. The magic Geiger counter hanging from my chest suddenly stopped its soft tick-ticking. It wasn't because there was no radiation. Rather, the needle had instantly slammed into the lowest dead zone, failing completely. On the wasteland, this deathly silence is 10 times more terrifying than a counter maxing out, It means there is a horrific magnetic field nearby capable of devouring all energy. I immediately drew the Glock from my waist and ducked behind a rusted, scrapped car. In a derelict alley less than 50 meters ahead, I saw a familiar back. It was one of old Ma's delivery men. We had just parted ways at the market half an hour ago. At this moment, he was kneeling on the ground in an extremely eerie posture. Even more terrifyingly, his body was shriveling at a speed visible to the naked eye. Within a few short seconds, a living adult had been drained of all vitality and moisture, turning into a mummified corpse that looked as if it had been air-dried for 100 years. Standing beside his shriveled corpse were two figures shrouded in tattered black robes. Their skin was crawling with purplish-black mutated veins, and the surrounding air distorted from the dense dark magic radiating from their bodies. One of the black-robed figures held a water canteen in his hand, the very same purified water I had sold to old Ma. What a pure aura of light! The black-robed figure took a deep breath of the vapor rising from the canteen, letting out a spine-chilling, hoarse laugh. The great dark demon god, Lord Rahu, will surely be very satisfied with this exquisite offering. Find the source, and bring that angel radiating that disgusting white light back to Shinjuku district. I felt my heart contract violently, and the blood in my veins seemed to freeze solid. The dark demon god entrenched in the heavily irradiated Shinjuku district, Gakumansatsu Rahu. He was one of the most terrifying evil gods to descend upon Japan 3 years ago. His followers grow their power by devouring human souls and radiation. I had made a fatal mistake. I thought the water was simply clean, but I overlooked the fact that when Serafina purified the source, she inevitably left behind a faint, microscopic trace of light magic residue. To a human, it was nothing more than sweet spring water, but to those dark cultists who are hypersensitive to the light element, it was practically the brightest beacon in the dead of night. They followed the scent from the canteen all the way to the vicinity of my territory. I didn't even dare to breathe heavily. Enduring my terror, I took a massive detour, circling around 3 full times, and only after confirming I wasn't being followed did I flee frantically back to the underground shelter. Kicking open the heavy airtight door, I didn't even have time to take off my backpack before charging straight for the armory. I began frantically stuffing magazines into my tactical vest and hauled out all the anti-tank mines and claymores I had reserved for defending against armored vehicles. Mortal, you're back a bit late today. Serafina was leaning over the desk, a screwdriver in hand, attempting to pry open a can of yellow peaches. Seeing me drenched in sweat and acting as if facing a formidable enemy, she tilted her head in confusion. What's wrong? Did you fail to buy the white sugar this goddess specifically requested? I didn't answer. I simply chambered around in silence, then looked up and stared at her intently. Forget about your canned yellow peaches, you idiot goddess. My voice was raspy from extreme tension. Have you ever heard of the prison gate fiend Rahu? Asterisk clang. Asterisk. The screwdriver in Serafina's hand hit the floor. The haughty goddess, who just a second ago was sulking because she couldn't open the can, saw the color drain from her face instantly. Her golden pupils, usually filled with appetite and pride, suddenly constricted, and her body began to tremble uncontrollably. She subconsciously wrapped her arms around herself, her 6 tattered wings of light trembling violently behind her back. Luo-ho! She murmured, her voice carrying a terror I had never seen before, a fear etched deep into the very core of her soul. That monster! The monster that tore the sky apart! 3 years ago, it was him. He tore my divine wings apart while I was still alive and cast me down from the clouds into this mire. Looking at the utter dread in her eyes, I closed my own in despair. That god-level calamity, which once felt so distant while ruling over the dark shadows of Shinjuku, had now, following the trail of half a pot of pure water, fixed its deadly gaze upon our barely comfortable underground haven. The game of playing house on the wasteland is over. The true desperation has quietly arrived. The piercing alarm was no longer an intermittent beep, but had merged into a single, shrill, continuous wail. I stared fixedly at the surveillance monitor on the desk, feeling the blood in my veins turn to ice. On the screen, the red dots representing high-risk heat sources weren't just a few, or even dozens. They were densely packed, like a vast sea of crimson blood, completely submerging the entire surface area of the old subway station. 10,000? 20,000? No, there were at least 30,000 mutated creatures. The dark cultists of Shinjuku had no intention of spearheading the assault themselves. Using that eerie dark magic, they drove every mutated zombie, radiation hound, and sewer aberration from the ruins of Chiyoda and Ueno, forming a tide of mutation powerful enough to trample everything in its path, heading straight for my shelter. Boom! The first blast door on the surface didn't even hold for 10 seconds before it collapsed under the impact of thousands of mutated creatures. Stay in the life support pod at the very back. Don't come out. I roared at the deathly pale Seraphina, slamming my hand down on the red detonation button on the wall. A series of violent explosions erupted one after another within the dozens of meters long underground passage. The 300 kilograms of high-explosive C4 and over a dozen claymore mines I had pre-planted instantly turned the narrow corridor into a sea of fire. Severed limbs and foul-smelling green blood splattered against the surveillance camera like rain, turning the screen black in an instant. But it was completely futile. The mutant tide knew no fear and felt no pain. The monsters behind trampled over the burning corpses of their comrades, surging forward like a frantic black mudslide. In less than 2 minutes, they had already reached the armored airtight door at the very core of my shelter. Zzz, zzz, zzz. A grating sound of corrosion rang out. Through the observation slit in the door, I saw hundreds of aberrations covered in pustules frantically spitting strong acidic venom. The armored steel plate, a full 10 centimeters thick, began to emit pungent white smoke as the surface rapidly softened and dissolved. Come on! You pieces of filth from the sewers! I poked the barrel of my Remington shotgun through the firing port and pulled the trigger. Amidst the deafening blast, the 12-gauge slugs instantly tore the lead zombies to shreds. I pumped and fired frantically until the barrel glowed cherry red, blistering my hands, and until the ejection mechanism jammed completely. But my lone firepower, in the face of a tide numbering in the tens of thousands, was like trying to extinguish a forest fire with a single cup of water. Bang! Accompanied by a deafening roar, the armored airtight door, which I had once regarded as an absolute defense, finally let out a desperate groan under the impact of a mutated giant bear the size of an armored vehicle, collapsing inward along with massive chunks of the concrete wall. Roar! A pungent, foul-smelling gale surged into the shelter as a dark mass of mutated monsters poured in like a bursting dam. The defensive line has completely collapsed. I tossed aside my ruined shotgun and drew the 2 large-caliber pistols from my waist, retreating while firing frantically. But there were simply too many monsters. They swarmed into my outer warehouse, the life and livelihood I had risked everything to accumulate in this wasteland. I watched helplessly as a radiation hound's sharp claws tore through my prized 50-pound bag of northeast rice. The pearly white grain scattered across the floor, instantly trampled into black sludge by venom-soaked footprints. I watched mutated zombies maniacally smash the shelves of canned luncheon meat, dehydrated vegetables, and precious medical kits. That was our hope for survival in the wasteland. That was the sum total of Seraphina's hard work, earned day by day in exchange for a sip of broth. Now, everything is ruined. In the face of this dimensional strike unleashed by the dark demon god, the survival rules I had taken pride in for 12 years were trampled into dust. No. Please. No. Seraphina's trembling voice came from behind. She had run out at some unknown moment, and as she looked at the wreckage strewn across the ground and the encroaching mutant army, her pure gold pupils reflected a deep sense of despair. She attempted to raise her hands to release the holy fire of light, but under the suppression of the surrounding dark magic, so thick it was suffocating, only a few faint sparks flickered on her tattered wings before being completely extinguished, like a candle struggling in the wind. Rahu's followers had long since contaminated this area with magic, stripping away the environment she needed to cast her final spells. Pfft. A mutated mantis's forelimb grazed my shoulder, tearing away a large chunk of flesh. The searing pain forced a muffled groan from me as I collapsed onto one knee. The pistol emitted a hollow click-click sound empty. I had nowhere left to retreat. Behind me was a cold metal wall, and beside me was the goddess of light, trembling uncontrollably and completely drained of power. Hundreds upon thousands of bloody maws, dripping with foul-smelling saliva, gaped before us, their crimson eyes shimmering with a bloodthirsty glint. My vision began to blur as despair, like a cold venomous snake, coiled tightly around my heart. Out of ammo, out of food, the defensive line breached, everything was lost. This survival game in the wasteland has finally reached a dead end. Blood trickled down my forehead, blurring my vision. I knelt on one knee amidst the ruins of scattered supplies, no longer possessing even the strength to lift my handgun. The mutated monsters ceased their mauling. They receded to both sides like a tide, clearing a path. A Rahu priest, clad in violet-black robes and radiating waves of high-level dark magic, stepped over the scattered cans of luncheon meat and walked slowly toward us. In his hand, he coalesced a venomous spear formed of pure dark elements, its tip pointed directly at my heart. How truly pathetic, high and mighty seraph, to have fallen so far that you require a mere mortal's protection. The black-robed priest let out a piercing, mocking laugh, his gaze greedily fixed on the trembling Seraphina. You should know the survival laws of the gods on this wasteland all too well. Drain this mortal soul, siphon his life force, and you can briefly restore your divinity to escape this place. Do it. Perhaps Lord Rahu will spare your life for your compliance. I spat out a mouthful of bloody phlegm and turned my head with difficulty to look at Seraphina beside me. She bit her lip hard, her once proud head now hanging helplessly, those golden pupils filled with extreme terror and confusion. Draining a human soul to recover power was indeed the final trump card for a god who had lost their divine strength. With trembling hands I fumbled through the lining of my tactical vest for a long time before pulling out the last half-piece of a compressed biscuit, warmed by my body heat, and forced it into her hand. Go ahead, you gluttonous white pigeon! I weakly parted my lips, pulling them into a hideous smile. Devour my soul, and then get the hell out of here. It's better. Better than both of us being chewed up as fertilizer by these monsters. Just don't forget to take this biscuit with you. Seraphina stared blankly at the crumpled compressed biscuit in her hand, then looked back at the blood covering my body. In that instant, the arrogant goddess who had once clamored to rule the entire city and demanded the most lavish sacrifices from mortals suddenly stopped trembling. What a touching display of master-servant devotion! Since you're unwilling to act, I'll do it for you. The black-robed priest snorted coldly. The dark spear in his hand lunged like a viper emerging from its hole, carrying a piercing shriek that tore through the air as it thrust violently toward my chest. I calmly closed my eyes, waiting for death to descend. Asterisk Pucci. Asterisk. The dull sound of flesh being pierced rang out. However, the anticipated agonizing pain did not come. A few drops of scalding liquid splashed onto my face. I snapped my eyes open, my pupils instantly constricting to their limit. Seraphina, drawing strength from an unknown source, threw herself in front of me at the absolute last second. The foul-smelling dark spear ruthlessly impaled her fair abdomen, and golden divine blood dripped from the tip of the blade onto the cold concrete floor. Seraphina! I let out a desperate, gut-wrenching roar. She turned her head toward me with great difficulty. She was coughing up mouthfuls of golden blood, yet from those fading eyes, crystal-clear droplets began to fall. They were not sacred essences imbued with magic, but salty, warm, mortal tears. You idiot mortal! She sobbed, her blood-stained hands gripping the spear that ran through her. I am the noble goddess of light. How could I ever eat such a foul-tasting soul? She turned her head and glared fixedly at the terrified black-robed priest before her, her eyes erupting with an unprecedented ferocity and resolve. This goddess hasn't had enough of his braised beef noodles yet. You mere lackeys of the dark demon god, who gave you permission to touch my exclusive chef? Accompanied by a shrill, soul-tearing shriek, Seraphina performed an act that struck fear into the hearts of all gods. She abruptly raised her right hand, grabbed the flickering golden halo atop her head, and then crushed it violently. Crack! The moment her divine halo shattered, the 6 tattered wings of light behind her suddenly erupted with a terrifying, blinding white glare, akin to a supernova explosion. This was not magic. She was burning her own godhead, incinerating the very essence of her existence as a deity. Boom! Absolute light swallowed everything. The instant the radiance erupted, the arrogant black-robed priest didn't even have time to scream before being instantaneously vaporized into fundamental particles within the searing holy light. Hundreds of surrounding mutated monsters vanished like snow at the epicenter of a nuclear blast, turning to ash amidst the pure white glow. The entire underground shelter seemed to have transformed into a miniature sun, yet I felt no scorching heat. The radiance merely enveloped me gently, rapidly healing my fatal wounds. A few seconds later, the light vanished instantly, like a receding tide. Only piles of ash and the pungent scent of ozone remained in the corridor. The mutant tide had been forcibly cleared into a vast vacuum by this devastating divine power, and the surviving monsters fled toward the surface in a frenzy of absolute terror. As for Seraphina, she collapsed straight backward like a ragdoll that had lost all its clockwork springs. I caught her in my arms. The 6 wings of light on her back had completely turned to ash and dissipated into the air, and her pure gold pupils had faded into a dull, deathly gray. The arrogant goddess who once fought me tooth and nail over a piece of expired chocolate had burned away the last of her divine body to protect a selfish scavenger like me. I held Seraphina. Her body felt as light as a feather about to drift away. That body, once so full of vitality, was now cold enough to inspire despair. I tightly wrapped the horrific puncture wound on her abdomen with medical bandages, but blood continued to seep through. I laid her down on the crude cot and pressed the blood-stained compressed biscuit into her limp, hanging palm. Listen, you gluttonous, stupid bird, don't you dare die. I gritted my teeth, tears mixing with blood as they splashed onto her face. If you just wake up, I swear, all the luncheon meat and braised beef noodles in my basement, Even that can of yellow peaches I've been hiding for 3 years, it's all yours. She gave no response, her faint breathing seemingly on the verge of stopping at any moment. Worse still, because the surface was still swarming with mutated monsters corrupted by dark magic, those foul miasmas were constantly seeping into the basement, relentlessly eroding the last remaining spark of life within her. If I didn't slaughter every last one of those pieces of filth outside and forcibly tear apart the dark magic field in this area, she would never make it through the night. I slowly stood up. In that moment, Kermayare, the scavenger who used to calculate every scrap on the wasteland and grovel just for half a bucket of clean water, was completely dead. In its place was a violent rage within my chest, burning hot enough to reduce my sanity to ashes. I turned and walked toward the titanium alloy wall at the deepest part of the shelter. There were no supplies there, only a keypad I had sworn never to touch unless the world was ending. I entered a 16-digit code, then inserted 2 specialized mechanical keys simultaneously and twisted them hard. Accompanied by the ear-piercing hiss of hydraulic exhaust, the heavy, thunderous doors slowly slid open to both sides. Behind the door, there were no canned goods or purified water, only the crystallization of old-world military technology. It was strategic-grade weaponry that I had dragged back by force from a secret self-defense force underground military base during the early days of the Godfall, risking being melted by radiation. I stripped off my tattered tactical vest and bare-chested, stepped into a suit of pitch-black, night owl, individual exoskeleton armor. With a low hum of electric motors, the mechanical spine and hydraulic linkages locked firmly onto my limbs. This armor, originally developed to combat alien behemoths, instantly granted me a terrifying strength that transcended human limits. I didn't even look at the standard rifles, instead walking straight to the heavy weapons mounting area. Using the exoskeleton's mechanical arms, I effortlessly hoisted an M134 6-barrel Gatling heavy machine gun. Next, I locked a massive ammo box containing 5,000 rounds of depleted uranium armor-piercing bullets into the rear buckle of the exoskeleton, the metal ammunition belt feeding directly into the machine gun through the supply chute. Finally, I mounted a fully loaded individual thermobaric rocket launcher onto my left shoulder. You cultists playing with dark magic, do you truly believe that gods are invincible? I stared at the data flickering across my tactical helmet's visor, my voice as cold as the depths of hell. Today, I'm going to show you exactly how mortal physics grinds a god into mincemeat. Griping the Gatling gun, I stepped back out through the armored airtight door with heavy, oppressive strides. At the end of the corridor, the tide of mutants that had just been repelled by the holy light was attempting to surge back into the basement, driven by 2 newly arrived high dark priests. They assumed that the disappearance of the light meant everyone inside was dead. The glowing angel is dead! Charge in, tear that mortal to pieces, and offer their flesh and blood to Lord Rahu! One priest roared, frantically waving his staff. I didn't say a word. I simply, silently raised the 6-barreled Gatling machine gun in my hands. My finger pulled the trigger back hard. VRRZZZZZZZZZZZ. The hum of the motor spinning frantically was instantly drowned out by a deafening, tearing roar. At a terrifying rate of 6,000 rounds per minute, the 6 barrels instantly spat out dazzling tongues of fire 2 meters long. The entire dark underground passage was illuminated as bright as day by the blinding muzzle flash. This isn't just shooting. This is a pure metal storm. Depleted uranium armor-piercing rounds, as thick as an adult's thumb and carrying terrifying kinetic energy, tore through the charging mutated giant bears like cutting through tofu. Whether it was the bones of mutated zombies or the hardened shells of sewer aberrations, everything was reduced to a mist of flying flesh and blood in the face of absolute physical firepower. Mana shield! Raise the mana shield, now! The 2 priests screamed in terror, joining forces to prop up a solid, violet-black magical barrier. Die! I roared, my finger clamped down on the trigger with no intention of letting go, pushing forward step by step against the recoil. Depleted uranium rounds slammed into the magical barrier like a torrential downpour. The shield, supposedly capable of withstanding mid-tier magic, held for less than 3 seconds before shattering like glass. Hundreds of rounds instantly turned the 2 priests into sieves, their bodies torn into shreds of raw meat by the terrifying kinetic energy before they even hit the ground. Seeing that the Gatling gun's ammunition was nearly exhausted, a mountain-sized stitched abomination came crashing around the corner. I decisively discarded the glowing, overheated machine gun and dropped to one knee, the thermobaric rocket launcher on my left shoulder instantly locking onto the target. Boom! The rocket burrowed into the body of the aberration and exploded. The secondary cloudburst explosive instantly sucked all the oxygen out of the passage, while the terrifying high temperatures and shockwaves vaporized every mutated creature in the front half of the tunnel in an instant. Stepping over charred corpses and melted slime, I walked out of the subway station step by step, standing beneath the night sky of the wasteland. The remaining thousands of monsters on the perimeter, having witnessed this horrific firepower akin to an Azura descending upon the world, completely lost their will to fight. They let out desperate wails and scattered frantically like a receding tide. I grabbed a radiation mutant that wasn't quite dead yet by the neck, hoisting it into the air with the mechanical hand of my exoskeleton. Go back and tell your Shinjuku masters. Tell that piece of shit named Rahu. I switched on the helmet's external loudspeaker, my furious roar exploding like thunder over the silent ruins. He broke her wings and destroyed my damn kitchen. I, Zero Kamaya, am now officially declaring war on him. Tell him to wash his neck and wait. I'm coming to Shinjuku right now to blow your temple into rubble and shove him into a microwave to roast him for the dogs. I casually crushed the mutant's neck. For the sake of that foodie goddess who took a fatal blow for me, this all-out war between mortals and gods has officially begun.